Hello and welcome to my Learn With Me Minifreak series. This is episode 5, LFO and Basics. So first, what is a Learn With Me series? A Learn With Me series is a series where you follow my end-to-end process in learning to get the best out of a synthesizer. In this case, it is the Arturia Minifreak. So far, you've got my overall impressions of the synthesizer. We've looked at each of the sections from a general perspective. We've been working with the oscillators in their basic wave mode. We've used the filters, we've used the envelopes, including the cycling envelope. So today we're going to look at the LFO. As always, init patch. It would probably be more straightforward if I just made patch 1 an init patch, but never mind. So there's our init patch. Let's do a little bit of shaping on that to get us started, and then let's dive into the LFOs. So though that wasn't the purpose of this episode, I hope that shows you that there are some relatively interesting timbres to be found, and I haven't really explored detuning these things. So for example, I could have a detuned fifth. Sounds pretty interesting to me. Anyway, let's go back to where we were. So let's get I've gone through a number of these things before, so I'm just kind of flying through a little bit to get us started. Okay, so LFO. Very much like the cycling envelope, the LFOs don't have any default routing. There are 2 of them, unlike the cycling envelope, which is only 1. I think the combination of having LFOs and a cycling envelope is quite compelling because the cycling envelope can lean towards being an envelope or an LFO. So you can think of it as either giving you 3 LFOs or giving you 2 envelopes, which I think is a nice flexibility to have. You can see in the mod matrix we have an LFO1 and an LFO2 row. So we have 2 different LFOs that can be routed to different destinations. I think what I'll do initially is use one of the LFOs and I will route them to the timbre parameter. So the timbre parameter gives us something like a pulse width sound. So how do we go about doing that? Well, pretty straightforward. There is a timbre 1 column, so that means the timbre of oscillator 1 available, and there is an LFO 0 as a source. So I scroll through as I've done before. So hopefully you can hear that movement already. How do we control that movement? Well, the parameters that we have here, the select button lets us select whether we're modifying LFO 1 or 2. We have a clickable encoder for the rate. When we click it, it is tempo synced. When we have it unclicked, it is not. So you can hear now it's going fairly fast. And slow. We also have the ability to trigger it. So the triggering modes are free, meaning that the LFO is running continuously in the background, whatever we do. The next mode is poly keyboard. So poly keyboard means each key that we play, the LFO corresponding to that voice will re-trigger when we press it. So that means that if I press a series of them, each one will be running out of phase with the rest. The final re-trigger mode is re-trigger mono. So re-trigger mono means that when I first press a key on the keyboard, the LFO re-triggers, and then however many notes I press after that, all of the LFOs will be running in phase with that first one. So mono re-trigger is something like having a global LFO, and poly keyboard re-trigger has them running differently. I think I quite like the variation that we get in poly. I've already shown you rate. I've talked about sync. So the final parameter is wave. Let me make it a bit faster so it's more obvious. So you can hear that drop, classic triangle, classic sine, that sort of pulsing from the square wave, sample and hold with slew, exponential saw, finally shaper. I'm going to come back and talk about shaper, but this is a way that you can configure the LFO shape. So you can make some complicated wave shapes here, which I think is, again, a pretty compelling feature. What I'm going to go for, given that this is something like a pulse width modulation, I'm going to use a triangle wave. I think that's working. And now I'm going to use LFO2. And LFO2, I'm going to use a different waveform. You can see LFO2 defaults to tempo sync. I'm going to turn that off. And let's try this exponential decay. And I used the cycling envelope for this before, so I think I might try and use LFO2 to do something similar, to give us a rhythmic pulsing sound. So let's go to LFO2 to cut off. Trigger mode. So you can hear, because that's distinctly rhythmic, and now I've got keyboard in poly re-trigger, you can hear that they can go out of phase with one another. In fact, for the PWM, I probably prefer free running. So now let's try and put it into the mono retrig mode for this second envelope, just for comparison. So you can hear that it's acting as if they're all simultaneously occurring. So for this sound, I think the poly makes a lot more sense. Okay, so that's got two LFOs in play there. I've already demonstrated the cycling envelope, so I think that's really all I wanted to show you of the LFOs. I've given you a basic introduction to the mod matrix. You can see we have two slots in play. As we go forwards, we'll dive a little deeper into the mod matrix, we'll dive a little deeper into the LFOs. But I think next episode, what I'm going to do is go through the other oscillator types available to us, because I think these are a very important feature of the synthesizer, and thus far what I've shown you is the use of this synth as a basic subtractive synth. So we're going to come back and we're going to really dive into what makes the Minifreak a freaky synthesizer. I hope that sounds appealing to you, but in any case, thank you very much for joining me today, and goodbye.